The night was cold, darker than the inside of a tunnel, and the city lights blinked like tired eyes across the empty streets. A girl named Amara sat under a flickering street lamp, clutching a thin blanket. Around her shoulders, her skin glowed. Faintly in the light, her hair tangled from days without care, and her stomach let out a long, painful growl. She had not eaten for 2 days, and every sound of frying food from nearby restaurants felt like a cruel reminder of how hungry she was. She watched people pass by, some in warm coats, some laughing, some staring at their phones, as if she were invisible. The smell of bread drifted from the bakery across the street, soft, sweet, and warm like a dream she could never touch. She whispered softly to herself, maybe tomorrow will be better, but she said that every night and every morning she woke up to the same cold, hard ground. Amara had once lived in a small apartment with her mother, who worked 2 jobs just to keep food on the table, but when her mother fell sick, everything changed. The hospital bills piled up, and when her mother passed away, Amara had nowhere to go, no family, no friends willing to take her in, and the little money she had was gone in weeks, so she learned to survive the hard way, sleeping near old buildings, collecting bottles for coins, and eating whatever was left behind by strangers. Still, she never lost her kindness. She shared what little she found with others, on the streets sometimes, giving her last piece of bread to a hungry stray dog or an old man begging for change. She would smile through her pain because somewhere deep inside, she believed that kindness would one day return to her like sunlight after a storm. That night, as the wind grew colder, she pulled the blanket tighter and looked up at the stars, or what little she could see between the city lights. She whispered, "Mama, I hope you can see me from up there. I am trying, I really am." Her eyes grew heavy, but her heart stayed awake, remembering her mother's voice saying, "Never let the world make you hard, baby. No matter what happens, keep your heart soft." Amara closed her eyes, trying to forget the hunger, but she didn't know that just a few blocks away, fate was waiting for her. A single act of kindness that night would change everything in her life forever. Amara woke to the sound of rain tapping against the pavement and the distant hum of cars rushing by. The air was damp and cold, and her blanket was soaked through. She rubbed her arms to keep warm and began walking slowly through the narrow alley behind the restaurant, where she sometimes searched for leftover food. The smell of fried chicken and soup filled the air, making her stomach ache with hunger. She bent down beside a trash bin, hoping to find something still edible, when suddenly she heard a weak voice. "Help, please?" Amara froze. She looked around, but saw no one. The voice came again, softer this time, barely a whisper. "Please help me." Her heart began to race. She followed the sound until she saw a frail old woman lying beside the dumpster. Her clothes were torn and covered in dirt, her face pale, her lips cracked as if she had not had water for days. Amara rushed forward, kneeling beside her. "Ma'am, are you okay?" she asked gently. The old woman's eyes fluttered open, just enough to see Amara's worried face. "I haven't eaten in days," the woman whispered, her voice trembling. "I thought I would die here." Amara's eyes filled with tears. She looked into her small, worn bag and found half a sandwich she had saved from yesterday. It was the only food she had left, but she didn't hesitate. She held it out to the woman. "Here, eat this, please." The woman stared at the sandwich in disbelief. "You're giving this to me? You need it more than I do," Amara said with a faint smile. The old woman took a small bite, her hands shaking with weakness. Tears rolled down her cheeks as she whispered, "Thank you, my child, thank you." Amara sat beside her, shielding her from the rain with her thin blanket. "It's okay, you'll be fine now," she said softly. The woman nodded slowly, as if trying to believe her words. For the first time that night, Amara felt something warm inside her chest, not from food or comfort, but from the simple feeling of doing what was right. Even when she had nothing left to give, she didn't know who this woman was or where she came from, but she knew one thing: she couldn't leave her alone in that dark alley, not tonight, because something inside her told her this moment was meant to happen. The old woman chewed slowly every bite, seeming to bring a bit of life back into her fragile body. Her hands trembled as she finished the last piece of bread, and when she looked up, her eyes were filled with gratitude and sadness. "What's your name, child?" she asked, her voice faint but gentle. "Amara," she replied softly, crouching beside her. Amara, the woman repeated, as if tasting the word. Kind name, kind soul. Not many would stop to help someone like me out here. Amara smiled weakly. It doesn't cost anything to be kind, she said. The old woman let out a shaky laugh, the kind that turns into a cough halfway through, and Amara's smile faded as panic filled her chest. Hold on, she said quickly. You're going to be okay. I'll get help. No, no, the woman tried to protest. But Amara had already stood up and started running. Her feet splashed through puddles as rain poured harder, soaking her clothes, but she didn't care. She ran into a small pharmacy at the corner and shouted, "Please call an ambulance. There's a woman outside. She's sick." The pharmacist looked startled at first, but when he saw the desperation in Amara's eyes, he nodded and reached for the phone. Amara waited only long enough to make sure the call went through before racing back to the alley. The woman was still there, lying weakly against the wall, barely breathing. Amara knelt beside her again. "It's okay, help is coming," she whispered, squeezing her hand. The woman's fingers were cold as ice, but she managed to whisper, "You didn't have to do this for me, child." Amara shook her head. "Everyone deserves help," she said softly, "even if the world forgets them." Minutes later, the distant wail of an ambulance echoed through the street. Red lights flashed against the wet pavement as paramedics rushed over. Amara stayed close, holding the woman's hand as they placed her on a stretcher. Her hair clung to her face, her lips trembling with fear and cold, but she didn't let go. When they lifted the old woman into the ambulance, Amara climbed in beside her without being asked. She didn't even know this woman's name, but something deep inside told her she couldn't walk away, not tonight, not after looking into those tired eyes that had seen too much pain. She didn't know it yet, but this decision would change everything that came after. The ambulance raced through the wet streets, its siren echoing in the distance. Amara sat inside, clutching the old woman's frail hand, while the paramedic checked her pulse. The flashing red lights painted the inside of the van as rain streaked down the windows. Amara's heart thudded in her chest. She had never been in an ambulance before, never thought she would be sitting beside a stranger fighting to keep her alive. When they reached the hospital, nurses rushed forward, taking the stretcher away. Amara followed quietly, her shoes squeaking on the polished floor. A nurse turned to her, asking, "Are you family?" Amara shook her head quickly. "No, I just found her. She needed help." The nurse gave her a gentle smile. "You did the right thing, sweetheart." They took the woman into a room, and Amara was told to wait outside. She sat in the hallway, staring at the white walls, the hum of machines, and footsteps filling her ears. She didn't know why, but her heart felt heavy, as if this woman's pain was her own. After what felt like hours, the doctor came out, holding a clipboard. "The woman will be fine," he said. "She's weak from hunger and dehydration, but you brought her just in time. You saved her life." Amara exhaled slowly, feeling her whole body relax. She whispered, "Thank you," and leaned her head back against the wall, closing her eyes. For the first time in so long, she felt that something she did truly mattered. Later that night, when the nurse said the woman was awake, Amara quietly stepped into the small hospital room. The old woman looked pale, but her eyes were open, clear, and kind. She smiled faintly when she saw Amara. "You stayed." Amara nodded shyly. "I didn't want you to wake up alone." The woman reached out her trembling hand. Amara took it without hesitation. Their fingers intertwined, and for a moment, the room felt warmer, softer, filled with something neither of them had felt in a long time. "Thank you, my child," the woman whispered, her eyes glistening with tears. "You're an angel walking these streets." Amara shook her head with a small smile. "I'm just someone who knows what it feels like to be forgotten." And as the rain tapped gently against the window, Amara sat beside her new friend, unaware that this small act of compassion had already set destiny into motion. Days passed, and Amara kept returning to the hospital every morning. She didn't know why, but something about the old woman drew her in. Maybe it was the warmth in her voice or the way her eyes softened when she saw Amara enter the room. She would bring her soup from the shelter, or a small piece of bread she managed to save, and sit beside her talking for hours. They shared stories about life, about pain, about survival. Two souls from different worlds finding comfort in each other. The woman's name was Margaret, and as she began to recover, her voice grew stronger. She told Amara stories of her youth, how she once lived in a big house with a garden full of white roses, and how her son Daniel was the joy of her life. She spoke about how smart and kind he had been, how he promised to take care of her when he grew up. But her eyes would darken when she spoke of what happened later. They had an argument. She said a terrible one about money and choices. He wanted to chase dreams she didn't understand. She thought she was protecting him, but instead, she pushed him away. One day he left angry and hurt and never came back. Over the years, she tried to find him, but life took her down a road of loss, sickness and loneliness, until one day she ended up on the streets. Amara listened quietly, her heart breaking for her. For a moment, she saw her own mother in Margaret's eyes, that same sadness, the same love hidden behind regret. I'm sure he still loves you, Amara said gently. If he has a heart, he's out there somewhere looking for you. Margaret smiled weakly. Maybe he is, or maybe fate wanted me to meet you first, she said, taking Amara's hand. You remind me of him, the same kindness, the same light in your eyes. Those words sank deep into Amara's heart. She didn't understand why, but she felt connected to this woman, as if destiny had placed her in that alley for a reason. She came every day, after that, reading stories to her, sometimes humming songs her mother used to sing. Even the nurses began to smile whenever Amara walked in, calling her the girl with the golden heart. She didn't know that outside those hospital walls, the name Margaret Harrington was about to make headlines again, and the truth of who this fragile woman truly was would soon turn Amara's entire world upside down. One afternoon, the hospital was unusually busy. Nurses whispered among themselves, phones rang constantly, and the sound of footsteps echoed down the halls. Amara sat in the corner of Margaret's room, reading an old magazine aloud, when she overheard two nurses talking just outside the door. Their voices were low, but the words made her heart skip. They say Daniel Harrington is offering a huge reward. One of them whispered, he's been searching for his missing mother for years, and he just went public with it. Amara froze. The name sounded familiar. She turned slowly to look at Margaret, who was resting with her eyes closed. Margaret Harrington, Amara repeated in her mind. Could it really be her? She waited until the nurses left, then leaned closer to the old woman. Miss Margaret, can I ask you something? She said softly. The woman opened her eyes and smiled. What is it, child? Amara hesitated, her voice barely above a whisper. Is your full name Margaret Harrington? The moment the name left her lips, the old woman's expression changed. Her eyes widened, her lips trembled as if she had just heard a ghost. Yes, she whispered after a long pause. That's me. How do you know that name? Amara's heart began to pound. She told her about what she'd overheard, the billionaire Daniel Harrington searching for his missing mother. The news spreading across the city. Margaret covered her mouth, her body shaking. My son, she whispered, tears streaming down her face. My Daniel, he's looking for me. Amara reached for her hand, trying to calm her down. That means he still cares. Miss Margaret, he never stopped. Margaret's tears kept falling. I thought he hated me, she said. I thought he'd forgotten. Amara shook her head. No mother forgets her child, and no child forgets their mother, she said gently. I'll help you find him, I promise. With the help of a nurse, Amara borrowed a phone and searched for the official contact number mentioned in the news article. Her hands trembled as she typed out a message, explaining everything: who Margaret was, how she had found her, and that she was safe at the hospital. She hit send and whispered to herself, please let this be real. Then she turned to Margaret and said with a hopeful smile, we'll see him soon, I just know it. Margaret squeezed her hand weakly, her voice trembling. Thank you, my dear. You've already given me more than I could ever ask for. Neither of them knew that at that very moment, in a glass tower across the city, Daniel Harrington had just read that message, and his entire world stopped. Within an hour, the quiet hospital transformed into chaos. Security guards rushed in, followed by men in suits and flashing cameras. Outside journalists gathered near the entrance, whispering that Daniel Harrington himself was on his way, the billionaire who owned half the city, the man everyone admired. for his success, and fortune was coming to this very hospital. Amara stood by the window holding Margaret's hand as the commotion grew louder. She could feel Margaret's hand trembling. "Is it really him?" she whispered. Amara nodded softly. "I think so, Miss Margaret. I think your son is finally here." Moments later, the door burst open. A tall man in a black coat stepped inside, his eyes wild with desperation. "Mother," he cried. The word echoed through the room like a heartbeat. Margaret gasped, tears spilling instantly. "Daniel, my son, is it really you?" He ran to her bedside and dropped to his knees, taking her frail hands in his own. "I looked everywhere. For you, I thought I had lost you forever," he said, his voice breaking. She touched his face, trembling. "I thought you had forgotten me," she whispered. "I thought I would die without seeing you again." Daniel shook his head fiercely. "Never, I could never forget you. Mother, please forgive me for leaving the way I did." There were no more words, only tears, and the kind of silence that speaks louder than anything. Amara stepped back, quietly, her heart full as she watched the reunion unfold. She felt something pure, something sacred, a mother and son finding each other again after so many years of pain. Then Margaret turned her head toward Amara, her eyes shining through her tears. "Daniel, this girl," she said softly, pointing at her, "she's the reason I'm alive. She found me, she fed me, she saved me." Daniel looked up for the first time, really seeing Amara, his face softened with disbelief. "You did this?" Amara nodded shyly. "Anyone would have done the same." Daniel shook his head. "No, not anyone," he said, standing up and walking toward her. "Most people would have walked past." You saved my mother's life." Amara lowered her gaze, unsure what to say, but Margaret smiled proudly. "She's got a heart of gold, Daniel." The billionaire reached out his hand to Amara, his voice thick with emotion. "Thank you," he said. "You didn't just save her, you saved me too." And in that small hospital room filled with tears and gratitude, the weight of years lifted from three broken hearts forever. The next morning, sunlight streamed through the hospital windows, painting everything in gold. Margaret was resting peacefully, her son sitting beside her. Holding her hand, Amara stood near the doorway, unsure if she still belonged there. But when Daniel saw her, he smiled warmly and motioned for her to come closer. "Amara, you've done more for me and my family than I could ever repay," he said gently. "I searched the whole world for my mother, and yet it was you, someone with nothing, who gave me everything. You reminded me what true wealth really means." He invited Amara to visit his office a week later. She hesitated at first, afraid it was all too good to be real, but she went. When she arrived, Daniel greeted her with a letter of scholarship, a new home, and an offer to work with his foundation, helping feed and shelter others who had lost their way just like she once had. Tears filled Amara's eyes. She tried to speak, but her voice trembled. "I don't know what to say." Daniel smiled. "Say yes, that's enough." From that day forward, Amara's life changed completely. No longer did she sleep under streetlights or search trash bins for food. Instead, she became a voice for kindness, a symbol of hope across the city. News stations shared her story, and people from all walks of life were moved by the girl who gave away her last meal and unknowingly saved the mother of a billionaire. But for Amara, the greatest gift wasn't the money or fame, it was finding a family again. Margaret treated her like a daughter and Daniel like a sister. Together, they built a foundation called Hearts of Grace, dedicated to helping the homeless find food, shelter, and dignity every day. Amara would look at the people they helped and remember the night she gave her only sandwich to a stranger. She often whispered to herself, "Mama, you were right. Never let the world make you hard." And in that quiet truth, she found her peace. Sometimes it takes losing everything to understand what truly matters. And sometimes the smallest act of love can open the biggest doors. Narrator, gentle tone. And that was the story of Amara, the girl who had nothing but gave everything. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more inspiring tales. Remember, kindness costs nothing but means everything. Fade to black with text. Be kind always.